Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, Season 2, Episode 5, Finding the Nouns, the official WBA remix. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back, as always. Feeling rather hip-hop in no way at all. My name is Jeffrey W. Ingram, and you will call me Episode J.
And feeling rather hipster in no way at all, I am Michael Miller.
Yeah, and when Michael and I say that we are hip-hop in no way and hipster in no way, that's not insulting hipster or hip-hop, just to be clear.
Oh, I in no way, shape, or form do I want to be associated with hipster or hipster culture.
You can't grow a beard. You can't grow a beard.
Are you insane?
I don't know.
You might not be able to grow a beard, but I can.
Grow a beard.
I can grow a very good beard.
I can't grow a beard at all. No, I got yelled at in the service. Someone was like trying to make fun of me because I had very poor ability to grow facial hair. And
it's not like an ability. Like calling it an ability is kind of weird. It's not an ability.
They were trying to dog me out, and I was kind of looking at them like they're insane. Like, I don't give a crap. And my roommate, who was Mr. Opposite of me, who had 5 o'clock shadow at like noon, he lost his schnizzle on them. He's like, do you know how much money I spend on effing razors? F you, get out of here. And he was a big enough guy that they listened. So, all right.
So maybe that's what it is he was growing the hair that you were supposed to.
That's right.
Like in a balanced world, you got the non-hair growth and he got the super hair growth.
And I think it's the lack of facial hair growth is kind of tied into the baby face somehow.
And it's ironic too, because you have such thick hair on your head.
Yes. And I still do.
It just stops at the face.
It's so thick. It all goes up.
It all goes up.
I have no hair beneath my head.
Let's move on.
Okay,
what are we talking about today?
Okay, hurry, get to the subject. We're talking about finding the nouns, and the nouns are the new way I like to think of what world building is. It's finding nouns that you use to describe your world and to make your world come alive. And so here in the first season, we're focusing on in the WBA version. I'm a top-down world builder. So I want to look at this from a top-down perspective, the way I look at things, a naturalistic perspective. So if you look at it from a distance, you're like, that could be real. But if you get up close, you're like, oh no, it's just BS.
Well, I mean, a lot of your stuff could fall into it's believable, I think is what we're trying to say.
But there's certain aspects where if you look at like my world map, it's really it's an unlikely configuration for a planet. However, I'd argue that makes it more real because every version a planet will end up is an unlikely version for a planet. My argument there. If it has life, it's unlikely. But
fair enough.
But it doesn't really matter. But the thing is, I shoot for believable. I don't shoot for
realistic.
For realistic, that's right. Because obviously, I want magic in my world. I don't have weak magic. It's system based. Even though I don't necessarily share the rules of my system, but it is system-based. But essentially, I like to call it naturalistic.
I had an interesting idea the other day for a story. I'm totally tangenting here. And if somebody wants to take this idea, you can do a short story with it, but this one's mine for a book. So nobody take this for a book. I want to make a story where the magic system is based on memory, which means you have to trade your memories for a spell
I don't remember
to work.
Anyway, so this is easy. Yeah, I would.
So here's the thing, and this is what it generates. It generates a people who the magic users are experience not junkie. Well, maybe some are experience junkies. So they're constantly trying to generate powerful new memories so they can trade them for a powerful spell to be used. So
it reminds me of
what?
And it's not fantasy. It's cyberpunk. Who was it? There was a short story, a Gibson one, Johnny Mnemonic, I want to say.
Yeah, that was Johnny Mnemonic, where
he like cut out part of his brain to put in storage. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's an
I actually forgot
thing
that.
where it's like, would you sacrifice the memories of your friends and family for something? What would you take? That's the interesting story, or the interesting questions that he got to.
The thing that's interesting about it is, though, think about it this way. You could go skydiving again and again and again and again and again. Every time you went, it would be your first time going. And you could trade that memory away again and again and again and again and again for a powerful spell.
Yeah.
So you could do it that way. And there's some people do it that way. Other people might be like, I'm going to have, powerful, intimate memories and go out and, have all these exciting experiences. And those are what they give away.
Or, you get in that moment where it's maybe not quite life or death, but your life could be a lot easier if you go down route A instead of route B. What happens? But you don't have that memory stored up to use. But maybe your kid. Would you forget about your kid for the event? Would you forget about your mother, your father? There's many different ways you can take to do it. But no, it's an interesting concept. I always love the cost. It's something we like here.
Yeah,
World Builder examples the cost. But
I was sitting there trying to come up with a magic system where that's the basis of the story, and it's because me, I'm a bottom up guy. Yeah. So I was trying to come up with like what is a different way to look at and approach magic that I have not seen or heard before, and I haven't. And I imagine someone's probably thought of something like this before. Sure. Obviously, Johnny Mnemonic, which I had conveniently forgotten about, is very
that part of your brain,
right? Which is a very similar concept.
Yeah.
But yeah,
part
but
of the core is the idea you're losing memories for game,
right?
Yeah, and the other thing to remember too is I typically come at things from a world scale. I like big worlds. I cannot lie. So when my style of world.
Sorry, you guys probably can't hear how hard I rolled at that one.
I wasn't lying. I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. But moving on.
But essentially, top down. What we're getting into is my framework where it's top down. The idea is naturalistic. And that's not super important here. Just keep in mind as we go forward. And it's world scale. So the idea is I like developing a core idea of a world and then going, what would be an interesting story within that world? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But where I like to start is when I world build, there are 6 big questions that interest me. That I have to say they consume me. Mm-hmm. The first one is, where are we?
I was just going to say, how big is the map? That cover where are we covers that.
And then how does it relate to us?
Okay. And who is us? Us as an avatar, or us as a people within the world?
Us as humans, so really, how does it relate to us? Us meaning the audience who is going to consume it.
Okay.
And when are we? That's a very important question for me. Who is there? That's your races. What is there? Is there a town, which kind of leads back to places, or is there a magic sword? Which leads to this section, which are props, or artifacts, if you want to be a little bit more
fancy.
And then. What are they doing? Which is my favorite question. What are the people doing or the creatures doing there? That's kind of where I get into here. And so from there, these questions lead me to my meta nouns, the big picture nouns I look at when I world build. And that's places. Where are we? Places. How does this relate to us? It's the rules. When are we? What time is it happening in? So for me, when I talk about time, is like if I'm in space age, then other things have happened to get me there. They didn't probably start in the space age. So what are the big picture scopes, that have happened to get me there? And then who is there? Which are the races, or the creatures, whatever. It's the life forms. What is there? That's my pride.
Let's go with the term entity. Because maybe they're robots.
Entity. I like that. We'll change from races to entity. And entity is so much more snazzy.
Yeah, because it might not be, humanoid creatures. It could be robots, in which case you're not going with a race. That way,
because I think probably fantasy races is probably more Googled than fantasy entity.
Well, I include entity is my request because races doesn't cover
It doesn't really cover
automatons.
And for me too.
And I'm a big fan of automatons.
And they're like, do I have cows? Cows kind of fall under races too. Just a non-sentient race, I guess.
What was the rabbit thing you used the other day? You were like, don't call a rabbit a.
Did I just say Babbit maybe?
No, it was like, I don't remember what you said. It was like, yeah. I thought you were pulling it from something because it sounded so readily available. I didn't think you made it up, but
off the top of my head, Babbit I think is the traditional one.
It wasn't Babbit. It wasn't Babbit. It was something totally different. Because that's fairly obvious.
That was BS that just came straight out.
Fair enough.
And then what are they doing? And that leads to cultures. And cultures, if you listen to the show, is by far the most consuming thing. When I do maps, and when I think about races, it's tied in ultimately to cultures, because cultures and ethnic groups, those create stories of the world. And so for me, I like to develop at least framework cultures, so I kind of have an idea of the impact of different entities. If I have a culture that's based maybe off of the Mongols, their interaction with the culture would be completely different than if it was the modern day Swiss interacting with you. You'd have totally different interactions with those two different culture groups. And so that's kind of like what I like to think about here. So those are the big picture things. And if you go to the show notes here, or go to gardul.com/mindmap, you can actually download my current mind map. It's really from 1.0 of the show, but the core of it is still intact. Kind of as your spider web out is going to change with the way I've thought now. But the idea is the core is intact, where I like to look at the people, the places, the races, and time. That's where I would always call evolution, where it's like for the UK to exist today, several things happened in its past, which led it to its current place. And now it's not saying if they had the same exact criteria, they could have ended up somewhere else. And that's quite possible, but they ended up where they are today, going back to pre-Roman Britain, and the series of things. Once people started going to Britain, and more people started going to Britain, people invaded Britain, and then Britain invaded other people. All those interactions created what the UK is today. And so that's why I think time is an interesting thing for me to think about. And, then ultimately, once I know those meta nouns, off of.
And to be clear, when you're saying meta nouns, that means like you're going to be naming all of these things. Yes. Like that's where the power. That's where
multiple names. So these are
well, of course, if you got
categories I care about,
right?
And you could have different ones that you care about. Some people might, think of it differently. I can't say what you would think of. If you go Google top down, I'm sure there's 10,000 different people's ideas on this, and I'm assuming there's a lot of crossover too. A lot of people like to have a lot of very specific questions to answer. I don't like going at it that way. I'm an abstract thinker. I like creating frameworks because there's a trap, and we'll get to the trap at the end, but there's a trap if you get into these specific questions as you world build. And we'll talk about that in a few moments as we wrap up. The next thing I want to talk about is actually the inspirations. So like when I was creating my world Gardul, which I love, and it's I spent the most time on, and it's evolved in several iterations as well too. As I've developed Gardul, the thing that interested me about the big picture question I really wanted to get to is, when you look at the evolution on Earth, you would have these periods of sustainability in China or in the Mediterranean, in Europe, right? And then you'd have waves of people come from the steppes and totally disrupt it. And so Gardul was created with this ability that it's almost impossible to get away from steppe nomads. It's almost impossible to get away from them. So
Does that mean it's almost possible for them to not exist, or it's almost impossible to escape them when they are chasing you? What do you mean?
Well, definitely the second part. But the world's laid out in such a way where there are a few choke points, but there are lots of big open plains that are amenable to nomadic horse tribes.
So it's more literal, you're saying?
It's more literal. There's
Okay.
the ability.
That's all I was clarifying.
Of places where they exist are vast, and it's a Pangean continent. So it's not like you can be. There are islands or whatever, but in general, they can run rampant. So you have this very interesting thing where it was like, Rome was this relatively stable place, and then the Mongols start sweeping out of the Asian continent, and they start pushing other tribes into Rome, and it caused waves of immigration into the Roman Empire, which over a century radically changed the empire, and then within another century caused it to collapse from a very stable kingdom to collapsing in a couple hundred years in the Western Empire, at least, and almost completely because the Eastern Empire struggled a lot and took a long time to recuperate. And in China, around the same time, you had the Han Dynasty, which is sort of the formation of the Han ethnic culture. It's kind of where the name comes from, obviously, and they were pretty much around the size of the Roman Empire, just as stable. And around the same time, you have these series of civilized states, and these waves of nomads start causing a ripple effect, which caused the Han to collapse in China. It causes the Central Empires to collapse and the Western Roman Empire to collapse, all within a couple hundred years of each other. So you go from a very stable world where the first Silk Road is set up to a complete collapse in just a couple hundred years. And so I really like the idea of that. And so Gardul, when I talk about it from a historical standpoint, there are lots of these kind of events that happen. And if you know, even in the main cultures, the Badrakian culture, they were a migrant group that came in, and then another migrant group came in after them. The group before them was a migrant group. So there were multiple waves of migrants that moved in, which helped form the current culture groups that sit there. So that's just what interested me here. And so Michael and I were talking about, and we're going to start this in the next episode. We're going to do a less build. We're going to do a high level start. It might be 2 episodes away. Depends on how I need to get there. But a high level start of, we're going to create a new world here. And so the thing I kind of want to walk away with from this episode is, one, sharing with you what the nouns are, and then starting to think about what's that big question we want to talk about here. What's the big idea? Because remember, I'm looking for a world scale naturalistic world. What's that big idea that could be interesting? And I don't exactly know. So one idea would be, you could have it be just the opposite, where it's a series of islands, and each island have a very unique culture, but the cultural sharing actually becomes very different. So you can have very unique culture set up in the world. Or you can kind of go the opposite of my world, where in the East and Eurasia, you had China. China became a central culture to the Far East because it was really isolated for a long time from especially the Far West. But because the mountains were so extreme between China and the areas to the west and the south, that essentially China became the Han ethnic group became a central culture, which heavily influenced the other cultures in the area, being the Koreans, being the Japanese, being the people in Southeast Asia, the Vietnamese, and the other ethnic groups that are in the area. And even the steppe nomads around there were heavily influenced by the Chinese. So the other idea would be, we could create something based off of a central culture. Where it's like this one really powerful cultural group. There are other groups that they take some cues from them, but they are their own groups. And so I'm kind of going back and forth. I don't know which way I want to go. I think the second way is a little bit more interesting. It wouldn't be like Earth Eastern cultures, but it would be a big centralized culture like that. And so I actually kind of leave it up to Michael here. What would you find to be more interesting, Michael?
What culturally or like based on
world building wise?
Well, what you're saying, kind of two things that jumped out at me a lot. And since we're going top down, you mentioned that your current world is Pangean, and then you a moment ago said something about maybe it's a series of islands.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks
a different thing. Yep.
So part of me thinks like, what if you had a world where the majority of it was water, and you have like a thin, maybe mostly the equator of the planet is land, like almost like an Oreo all the way around the world, where parts of it are broken so that you have like dotted islands across a certain area getting from points A to point B. I just think that geography would excite me because I haven't seen.
It's much more interesting.
Yeah, because I haven't seen anything like that before. So I think that would be interesting to play with and then go from there. So you don't have your centralized culture, except maybe in an area where you've got a lot of land, because there's going to be some of that.
Or it'd be shocking, right? So we don't know yet because we haven't developed it. It's top down. So there are many different ideas that could come to. Probably not going to be a central culture though. It could be initially, but times are changing. Island, we'll call Island World for now. That is not the final name. Island World.
I mean, look, we're talking a lot of the majority of the world is water. You want to call it a water world?
No.
If you guys haven't listened to the Water World episode or understand Jeff's hatred for the movie Water World, such a great movie.
They're all like half naked in the whole movie, but
they're not.
Yes, they were.
What are you talking about?
Tropical setting that they were in.
Well, yeah, it was warm.
But which is ridiculous because to cover every bit of Earth, you need to have like 30,000 feet of water.
Yes, we know.
Thin atmosphere, and you freeze and die.
Well, or the other idea is not that the water went up, but the land went down, Jeff. We have plenty of water on this planet.
The idea of the world.
I understand their science is totally wrong. They said the ice caps melted and the water went up. And I realized that wouldn't happen. If all the ice caps melt, we're only going to lose like 30 feet of shoreline.
But the thing is, even if they're right, everyone freezes to death and die if anyone survived. So that world was so implausible. It's not why I hate it though. It could be completely implausible. It was a really bad movie.
You just hate it because you didn't think of it first.
I will take credit for not thinking of that one. Yes.
Fair enough. You'll own that.
I will own that one.
Okay. Fair enough.
So we're starting Island World. Definitely will not be called World.
Island. I like Island World. I can live with that. I mean, we can maybe come up with a better name, but that's like the proxy name.
But what we'll do a lot in the season though is we will sit there and we will create a high level island world which you can steal and use. This will be a free and open source world, right? Use as you will. If it's pornography, don't give us credit. Just plagiarize it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Still let that one go. So what is the world building task?
Hold on, the quick sum up here.
Oh wait, you're still summing up?
The big sum up is ask yourself the questions that consume you. And this is really kind of tied, so I could probably do it all in one. But
yeah, let's do it all in one.
Find the nouns that are important to you. It might not be top down. You can steal my system right here. Just go to the show notes on Gardul.com. Look up season 2, episode 5, and just grab my notes here and go from there. And we'll flesh it out a little bit more as we go on in the season. But stick with us. We'll start using Island World as a way to come up with some cool stuff. And now there's a trap. And the reason why I say here is I build framework worlds. The trap is if you get too many questions that you have preset when you go into a scenario. The trap is you try and rebuild Earth. And that is the biggest mistake you can make in world building because you can never complete it. And if you do, it's actually really boring. Earth in general is a pretty boring place to be for most people in most places at most times.
That's why we're constantly trying to make up fictional worlds.
That's right.
We're trying to make up something more interesting.
So avoid the trap of trying to recreate a world. Avoid the trap of going in with preconceived questions, because it's funny when you ask yourself the same question 15 times, you're going to come up with the same answer 13 times. Like you might have a few answers the first time, but you're going to start sticking with one. And I have to watch out doing this anyway going into here, because I have my idea of, oh, this is what an island thing should be. This is what this should be. And so you kind of always have to check yourself when you're being creative. So avoid asking yourself too specific of questions. Don't assume that they have art and architecture. They might or might not. It depends on what you want to do. But we'll kind of get in. We'll start creating a high-level world going forward, probably in 2 episodes. And then we'll try and avoid the trap, and we'll just kind of build a framework out for a world that people can just use or whatever. And now for the world building task. Come up with
that was thought that was the world building task.
It kind of was, and I'm just going to reiterate here. You know, what are your world building questions, and then what are the nouns you come up with? I gave you mine, and if you want to use mine, it's the same. It's a really quick answer. If not, it's going to take you a little bit longer. Think about in the big picture wise, what are the nouns? Or if you're a bottom up person, what are the things at the bottom? What are the nouns you're trying to get to? And what are the questions that get you to find those nouns? And now for the real world task.
Real world task. Go out there and make some memories that are completely separate from your geek endeavors. We know that you could spend all day either playing video games, reading nerdy books, working on your worlds. Go do something different than that and make some new memories, something fun with people that you love. You know, if you're out in public, wear a mask.
Yeah. Yes. Wear a mask.
Got anything else?
Well, the thing is, you know, take your ideas, go get the mind map from Gardul.com/mindmap. Go to Undercroft, sign up, join in, and share your experiences with everyone.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.